Okay, let's kick off. Great to have you on board today. Thank you to everyone for joining us for today's webinar, our monthly business risk review, looking at our March figures. Obviously, the big thing coming to an end at the end of March was JobKeeper. It came to an end, I believe it was the 28th of March. So I think the question on a lot of people's lips, and I've been asked the question a lot, has that had a big effect on the numbers? Keep in mind, we are looking at March figures, so very unaffected, totally unaffected by the end of JobKeeper. However, I will touch on that, of course, and discuss a little bit about what we are seeing so far in April to give you a bit of a taste. As always, just a little bit about CreditorWatch and our product suite. If you aren't familiar with it, I do encourage you to jump online and have a look, particularly if you're a medium or large enterprise business. Click on the corporate link and you will start to see those other products that sit outside the core offering of credit reports, monitoring alerts as well. Things like our online credit application Apply Easy to help onboard customers, do away with paper-based credit applications, and of course Data Logic, which is a hugely important tool that's being utilized at the moment by a lot of customers to help them assess their portfolio, their ledger as a whole, understand where the risks are lying, understand importantly where there's opportunity to actually get paid a little bit quicker and potentially improve cash flow. You're able to see where customers are paying you slow but paying others fast, for example, which is a great way to improve your cash flow if you can put a bit more pressure on them to pay more in line with how they're paying everyone else. Some key highlights. I like this slide because it kind of indicates why and how we're able to sort of talk about what we're seeing in the market, how we're able to make predictions. It's a really good predictors on about 800,000 businesses out there. So really, really important to understand what data it is that we've got coming into our bureau, and keeping in mind that the vast majority of that data coming in is totally unique to CreditorWatch. It's not being accessed by others. It can't be accessed by others. And the key piece and the key reason around that is the fact that 90% of our customers use CreditorWatch exclusively. And also we're the only bureau that integrates with the likes of MYOB and Xero accounting platforms. So it gives us great insights into how businesses, how debtors out there are paying their bills. That leads nicely into the business risk review itself and what it is. Plenty of you are returning webinar attendees, so thank you. And if you haven't attended one of these, welcome. The business risk review is really looking at a lot of that aggregated data, what it means, what we're seeing, picking out some key insights, particularly around administrations, payment times, payment defaults. And one of the last slides I'll show you today, and something that we will start to build on over the coming months, is the probability of default around specific industries. So we will start to build on that over time, but it's a really nice indicator. We're just flagging some higher risk ones at the moment. Probably won't surprise most of you, particularly those that may be exposed to those particular industries. So a little touch on the type of data, the sources that we're accessing. As I mentioned, public, government, private, proprietary data sources, ASIC, business register, APSA, courts, debt collectors are providing debt collection actions, and of course the bulk of the data coming from our customer base and payment defaults, trade payment information, and also credit inquiries as well, which is something that I don't have a slide for today, but I will touch on. We're seeing credit inquiries in March. We're at an 18-month high, which is really, really impressive. It means that companies are out there applying for credit. Companies are out there running assessments, running checks, running credit reports on debtors to see what sort of credit risk they represent. It's a really good indicator that business is back. We know we're in a phenomenal position. If you were to go back to anywhere from probably April through to September, October last year, I don't think where we find ourselves today would have been in anyone's best case scenario modeling. So certainly a positive position to be in. Yes, there are some increases in some of the key metrics that we track on a monthly basis. However, you'll see that they're certainly well below where we used to be well below pre-COVID levels. And ultimately, we're expecting to see an increase over time back up to those pre-COVID levels at a minimum. So let's take a look at payment defaults. Obviously, a really important indicator and one of the lead indicators in a debtor's journey to administration. So what we talk about when we talk about the debtor's journey to administration, where are they showing pain points? Where are they showing indicators that they're in financial distress, having cash flow issues, and potentially heading towards administration? The two main ones would be payment time, so how quickly or how slowly they are paying their bills, right? And that is accessible through the payment predictor within CreditorWatch reports, also in DebtorLogic, and of course we report on it from a industry perspective. And the other one is a payment default. So as a CreditorWatch user, you're able to register a default against a debtor that owes you money. We saw that the number of those totally drop off last year. Understandably, Aussies are very sympathetic to their fellow countrymen being in distress. We see defaults drop off, particularly around natural disasters like floods and fires, and COVID is no different. However, we certainly are starting to see an increase back up to those pre-COVID levels. I think also, what I'm hearing from our customers is that the economy is doing well, business is doing well. For those companies that they've been chasing for a long time and are either getting no response or aren't keeping to their promises or payment plans that they had in place, now is the time that they are choosing to register defaults against those customers. It's a really powerful collection tool. If you are a customer, you should be using it as leverage in your collection process by utilizing it as a warning to say, hey, we will be registering a default against you, and two, following up on that. It's a really powerful tool because if other CreditorWatch customers are monitoring that particular debtor, they receive an email alert saying, hey, there's been a payment default registered against them, that creditor will likely say to the debtor, I'm not doing business with you until that's been settled. And similarly, if anyone looks at that credit report in the future, they will see that there is a payment default registered against it and are likely to knock that that debtor back for trade credit or finance or whatever it might be. So ultimately, it remains on their file. Powerful tool to maybe not get paid if they don't pay you now. Hopefully, it results in them paying you down the track because they get knocked back or start to lose access to all their credit limits. If you can see those flashes happening on me, I'm not sure if you can see it, I can see it out the corner of my eye. We've got some photos being taken in the office today, so hopefully not too distracting. So what are we seeing from a payment default perspective? If you're looking at Feb to March, we've seen a 9.5% increase, which is quite a large increase, in any month-to-month scenario. However, when you start to think about it from a COVID perspective, and we look back at March 2020 versus 2021, we are still down 35%. Okay, and March 2020 was largely unaffected by COVID, bar the last probably week or so. So we are still down, well down on pre-COVID levels, and I expect that to continue to increase. There might be some lumps along the way. Obviously, April, school holidays, Easter, Anzac Day, usually a slower month, so that could see transactions sort of slow a little bit. However, that number will likely go back up to pre-COVID levels at the very least. The next one I like to look at, payment time. So as I said, those early indicators, how a company or an industry is paying their bills, plus payment defaults are the first two really important indicators that a debtor is heading towards administration. From a risk score perspective, there's a lot of emphasis put on that as well. And we know from our risk score modeling that anyone who's slow paying and or has payment defaults against them is a good chance of heading towards administration and having a much higher probability of default in the next 12 months. So having a look at the month-on-month time, so Feb 21 to March 21, no really big changes. I think a really nice one that we can see here is arts and recreation. We've seen a big drop, so people are starting to get back out there a lot more, which is fantastic news. Very flat pretty much across the board. Majority of instances we've seen drops, and the only really big concerns that we see still being quite high, healthcare and social assistance, which I've spoken about before, transport and warehousing, and of course administrative and support services. Looking at the year-on-year scenario, really encouraging to see that we are getting back to pre-COVID levels. It's taken time. We saw a big increase in payment times through most of last year. It came off a little bit. We then had, lockdowns and breakouts and whatnot. Saw it pump up a little bit more. But for the last sort of four months or so, we've started to see sustained improvements, which is really important, really good indicator that the economy and trade in general is getting back to normal, is back on track. So it's great to see here, and it should certainly provide quite a bit of reassurance to start doing a bit of trade out there. Of course, there are some outliers within there. Administrative support services we've spoken about previously, healthcare and social assistance, and also the really nice improvement that we see, which is one of my favorites to talk about, is accommodation and food services here, which is actually a huge improvement. So good to see. So best performing industries, just looking at this quickly: public administration, safety, education and training, and mining. Mining has been extremely solid throughout the whole thing. All of them under 15 or less days overdue, which is anyone in collections knows if you can keep it down, that's a really positive. More affected industries, administrative and support services, a lot of that is being brought back in-house. There's a lot of pressure on that industry. In general, transport, postal and warehousing, again, I've said this before, it's not all about Zip and Afterpay, Kogan and e-commerce. There's a huge amount of a huge number of businesses that fall into this, like general holiday and travel and buses and transport, tourism agencies and that sort of thing. So a lot of pressure, obviously, within that space as well. And of course, a lot of things moving from the need for post. Post has been struggling for a long time, and people moving to digital signatures, for example, which obviously a nice plug there for Apply Easy that I spoke about earlier. If you can do away with needing to courier things around, you can just utilize electronic signatures, and we've certainly seen a big shift there as well. The last one, healthcare. I have spoken about it before in the past. It's a strange one. Middle of a pandemic, surely healthcare is paramount. It should be doing really well. The fact is that when we talk about healthcare, anything that is COVID related is getting a lot of support, a lot of funding, a lot of money towards it. Everything else is being has been put to the side, delayed, surgeries, etc. So less focus on that. All the focus is really going to COVID related health. External administration. So this has been, an ongoing discussion since March last year. What will happen? And we know that the introduction of JobKeeper in particular, as well as the safe harbour measures that were put in place, resulted in a huge decrease in the number of administrations. And we can see that right from April, and we're still experiencing that through to March. We're down something like 40, 50%, depending on which month that we look at. On average, it's around those two figures. March was no different. There was an increase up from Feb, and there was an increase up from Jan as well, which is promising to see. You never like to see companies fail, but ultimately we know that companies have to fail. It's just how it works. It's how capitalism works, how economics works, it's how the market works. So what we really want to see is a nice, easy, sustained increase back up to those pre-COVID levels of, between 750 and 850, the number of companies going into administration every month. We expect to see that. April certainly isn't suggesting that there's going to be any sort of huge jump. We haven't seen a big jump so far, and we're already halfway through the month. It takes time for companies to realize, okay, I know I was reliant on JobKeeper. I'm going to go and see my accountant. That takes 2 weeks to sort of get a booking. They have a look at it. Yep, you know what? You are in a lot of trouble here. You need to go and see a restructuring specialist, or you need to consider an administrator. That can take another week or two. Then they get into it, etc. So we're not going to see this huge increase, I don't believe. Of course, there's always a caveat with COVID. If there are, more outbreaks that result in lockdowns, and/or we start to see borders get closed again, that will put a lot more pressure on businesses that don't have the protections that they had last year in the form of Safe Harbour, and also JobKeeper, which has now come to an end. Looking at the states, no big sort of surprises here. This is fairly consistent with New South Wales always having the majority of them, and Vic, Queensland, and WA sort of in line thereafter, but always good to know. I think what's important is if you think about how many businesses out there, depending on which figures you look at, it can be anywhere from 1 million to 2.5 million. You know, having less than 1,000 companies going to administration a month, and typically around probably 8,000 a year, it is a really, really small portion, but we know that there is going to be an increase in the number that we have seen over time. Court actions, again, court actions have been down significantly and are still down significantly, bar Queensland, where has seen a huge increase in the number of court actions. The volume of those isn't a huge number, but it should also be noted that they are getting back on track, and their court system seems to be processing plenty of court actions that or proceedings that were obviously on hold through COVID. This will be an interesting one to watch. Typically what we would see in that journey to administration, payment times blow out, payment defaults get registered, court actions start to be processed or default judgments handed down, and then of course winding up at administrations as well. Again, on a whole, looking at national numbers, we're still well down on where we were from a pre-COVID perspective. Probability of default. So I spoke about this earlier. This is looking at industries as a whole, and we will expand on this. We'll start to look at all industries in time, but I just wanted to sort of give you a bit of a taste this time round. Accommodation and food service, while we're seeing really nice improvements from a payment perspective, states, cities opening back up, more trade, more foot traffic around. I'm in Melbourne for the first time in 15 months. Definitely more people around than there has been, according to my staff here, which is great news, but still definitely not back to pre-COVID levels. A huge amount of of debt to ultimately be processed. A lot of directors and companies out there that will have to have a good hard look at their business and work out whether there is a future for them. It is certainly going to be tough, but there are improvements. But as a result, we've got them as our highest industry at risk. The next one there, transport, postal, and warehousing at 5.17%, and then public administration and safety. So as I said, this is a really, really new sort of metric that we're using to display. It's really exciting. There's not a huge difference between the top one and the bottom one. You might think 5%. That's not overly high. If you were talk to a banker, people in lending, that's an extremely high instance of default, or the probability of default. So most industries are probably higher than they were pre-COVID. That's the simple fact that we've been extremely reliant on stimulus packages to keep the country going, and of course the likes of Safe Harbour as well. So we will start to report more on these, and it's something that I really like to have a look at, and hopefully I can get you some historical figures as well. So what are we expecting to see come April? Look, April's a funny month. You typically have December, Jan, which is, depending on what industry you're in, it can be quite slow, whether you're paying or collecting bills, and generally trade goes down, particularly in January. Feb, a shorter month, 28 days, usually March, everyone gets back to it, and then you're sort of rocked a little bit by school holidays and Easter and of course Australia Day as well. So I'm not expecting any big surprising numbers to come out of April. To date, being halfway through the month, we haven't seen anything surprising either. It's fairly consistent with what March was looking like, or what March looked like, sorry. But as I said, I think once we get through April, everyone gets back to school, back to work, we'll start to see those figures sort of normalize, and we know that we'll get really good indicators out of May through to November. I usually say through to Melbourne Cup is when Australians typically start to take the foot off the gas a little bit through to Australia Day, being the lucky country that we are. So yeah, no real negatives to talk about. We will see increases in those key metrics around court actions, payment defaults, and administrations, but ultimately they are just working their way back up to pre-COVID levels. Just had a question come through here, and it's something that we are actually working on. Our external administrations across all sectors or a particular sector. There are certainly some that stick out more than others. I don't have the figures with me in front of me. However, we can access them via ASIC. That's something that I will get added to our next webinar next month. So when we report on the April figures, I will try to pull in some figures from industry perspectives as well. The other question was external administration slide. Are those figures whole numbers, exact 218 or in thousands? No, they are whole numbers. So yeah, there's not a huge number of administrations on a monthly basis, and on a normal sort of month, they would maybe be double that. So yeah, certainly not 218,000 businesses going into administration, just 218 total in New South Wales. The other thing I would like to just jump over to quickly is to show, obviously, CreditorWatch. We do have all of these market insights that you can jump through and play with on the website. So please do jump through and have a look at that. The business risk review market insights, interactive, so you can have a play with it to see how everything is changing. You can start to get into industry breakdown. Here we go. That's what we were asking about before, wasn't it? You can start to have a look at which industries are contributing to those administration numbers. As you can see, there's some that stick out more than others, but really, on a whole, the numbers aren't that high to have one particular industry dominating the administrations in total. So the biggest one, professional, scientific and technical services, construction is the next thereafter, and manufacturing rounding out the top three, retail trade, wholesale trade coming in at 4 and 5. So please, I encourage you to jump onto CreditorWatch to have a look at market insights. The other thing to look at is we worked on a white paper that we released earlier this month, might have been late March, the future of insolvencies, tsunami, torrent, or trickle. We worked very closely with one of the partners and the chairman at McGrath-Nicol, and also the CFO at Lynx Cargo Care Group, having a look at that. So please do jump in, have a look at the future of insolvencies, a nice white paper with plenty of discussion and input and comments from myself and those that were included in it. What can we expect to see over the next 6 to 12 months? So some really good things in there. So any further questions, please jump on to the blog, have a look. It might answer some of the questions for you. We've got the business risk review release in there, which talks about today's findings. And then there's other, of course, great content in there, like Meet the Crew, bit of discussion around JobKeeper, etc. So with that in mind, I wanted to say thanks very much for joining us. As always, I like doing these webinars and talking through what we are seeing. And look, there's going to be plenty more in the future. Keep an eye out for it, and I will chat to you very soon. Thanks very much.